All right, welcome back to another episode of Swadeshi, Videshi, and this week my guest is Leela Jadhav. Leela is a Oxford student studying English, and she's involved herself in a lot of things that are happening in Oxford. And today we're going to talk about being a woman of color, being a person of color at Oxford, and her experience as a diaspora member. Leela, it's a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really bad at the introductions.
This is so much fun. I love it.
It's so awkward because I'm like, what do I say? Do I want to sound like an announcer?
It's okay.
So when I first started the show, I looked up announcing YouTube videos, and when they, you had those little like fairs with announcers, and they're just like selling off things.
Yeah.
I tried to like mimic them, but it's a bit of a failure.
No, it's fun. This is so exciting.
All right. So what year are you at Oxford?
So I'm a fresher, but I took a gap year. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm a fresher.
All right. So any interesting gap year stories?
Let me think.
Did you discover yourself?
No, I was kind of like, I kind of just traipsed around and did random things in different places. But I wish, like looking back on it, I kind of wish I'd traveled more. But like so I went to like Kenya, and then I went to India, and then I went to some other places to like do work experience in different places and like build up kind of experience in different things. But I didn't actually, I wish I'd done more. I feel like your gap year should be just for like pure travel in many ways.
Not discovering yourself.
I think you discover yourself through pure travel.
Okay.
And I wish I'd done more of that because you know what? Maybe I would have found myself along the way. But I've got time, so.
Okay. You can take another gap year.
Yeah, exactly.
So you went to India. Where did you go and how long?
I went to Chennai, which is where my family are, and I was there for a month. And I was there working with The Hindu, which is like a Guardian.
That's a huge issue in itself.
Yeah.
Press standards, especially now in such a pivotal time within India. Did you see any of that? I don't know if you've heard the news, but The Hindu isn't involved in this, but I think a week ago they're calling it the Cobra Post, and people basically discovered how these media houses were taking money to sell news or sell propaganda. And like Times of India, Times Now, all these big networks. So did you ever experience that somewhat?
No, I think TOI, Times of India, is much more complicit in a lot of that stuff. The Hindu's always been like decisively on the left of Indian politics, whether that's on the left of politics globally, like that's another discussion. But that's why I chose to work with The Hindu. Because obviously I'd read a couple of Hindu issues before going in. I was involved in, like, I did a lot of, like, reading and editing and stuff. Well, editing and quotations, but a lot of reading for the purposes of editing, but no one ever used my edits. And I felt like, considering how highly the Hindu, like, sees itself, the quality of the English and the quality of the writing was quite poor, in my opinion. But then, obviously that's an instinctive reaction for someone who I think grew up in the UK. And I kind of mediated that by like remembering that it's not, I think The Hindu isn't read by people who like see the quality of the English as the primary concern, right? Whereas I think with The Guardian, a lot of the writing is about how well it's written, like how like fluently and eloquently the message is brought across. Whereas for The Hindu, I think it was a lot more about how quickly someone can gain the information that they need to get from the news. So I think they cater to like probably quite different audiences in that sense, but I would say the quality of the writing in The Hindu didn't strike me as anything like prestigious or good, which was quite disappointing considering how much they how highly they hold themselves in regard, I guess. But I still think it's a great newspaper. Go read The Hindu, guys. Like, it's not that bad. The lifestyle section, I wrote an article for that. That's quite good.
So let's back up. So you're through and through a diaspora member,
Yes.
an Indian diaspora member. I think it was in 2011 when the census came out, the Indian government also put out a statistic about how many diaspora members are living abroad, and it was around, I think it was the second biggest next to China, and then they said that obviously that would increase, but it was around 30 million to 40 million diaspora members. Citizens of India. And then diaspora member, obviously they can't really equate because they have no record of. So you were born and brought up in London.
Yes.
What does India mean to you?
Whoa, big question.
Broad question.
I think that's quite like my answer to that would be quite dynamic. It changes like kind of almost every day, every week. I think like you go through, I went through this phase. I don't want to speak for like entire diaspora because I don't think I can do that. No,
you're speaking for yourself. Right?
Yeah, so I think I went through a phase when I was like 16 to 19 where I was very much like India is my home, like fuck the UK, like India is where I belong. Like when I go to India, I feel like my people have like met me in my heart, just like weird stuff like that where you're like trying to connect to a culture because you feel like it makes you special, I think, in a way, or that you feel like it's a lost part of you that you want to reclaim.
Makes you special or makes you comfortable?
Both. I think a lot of it, especially when you're a teenager in the UK, is about making yourself feel special. At least I think it was for me a little bit, but I never really let myself think that, because you can, you have an edge on a lot of what your white friends, which you've never had before, because you've always, I think, felt like you could never like click into their culture, and so finding something else that makes you feel like you don't need to click into their culture because you have a different like set of like a framework to tap into, makes you feel like you can use that to elevate yourself, elevate yourself, sorry. And that was definitely a phase I went through, and I think you go through that and then you come out of it and you're kind of like, okay, so I don't really feel at home in India, so I'm not going to pretend I do. I don't necessarily feel 100% at home in the UK, but that's kind of okay. And I think part of being diaspora for me is existing within like two spaces and learning how to reconcile them with each other.
So when you say you're British Indian, are you more British or are you more Indian?
I'd say it's hard because I think they both
Or are you British Indian?
Yeah, I think they both come with a lot of like different connotations, and I wouldn't like put myself in either field, because of I think how other people would see those two British and Indian concepts. But I would say for myself, I'd see myself as a Londoner, if that makes sense. Like I don't think I'm British. I never really feel British. If I went outside of London, I'd feel like an outsider, but within London I feel very much at home. And that kind of translates across. So within Mumbai, in certain parts of Mumbai, I feel very much at home because it's like a busy, fast, buzzing city.
Right.
There's like a dynamism and a multiplicity of it that feels.
So it's more about the metropolitan feel.
I think it's much more about the metropolitan feel because I think, especially if you're diaspora, if you live within a metropolis, it's much easier to feel at home because there are like sort of signs of your culture and your like hybridity everywhere. And I grew up in Shepherd's Bush, which is quite a diverse area within London. And I was always surrounded by people who weren't, English all the way through. And that felt quite comfortable for me. And that's why I think London is so special, because whether you identify as British or Indian, you don't ever need to properly think about that if you don't want to, because London is so full of people just getting on with their life, but with a hybrid of identities. Right.
So coming from what you said, like you weren't surrounded by people that were English, and then coming to Oxford now, how's that transition? First of all, how is Oxford?
Oxford's
especially in that diversity issue, and more so feeling comfortable here, because what you're saying is you felt comfortable with the diversity, you felt comfortable with the complexities that London offered you. I have diverse backgrounds, so
I think it's hard for me because I went to a very white school in London, so all of my friends have always been white. Like I've grown up around
you were the diversity.
Yeah, I was the token diversity in many ways. So coming here in that way wasn't too much of a shock. I think what did make it more of a shock was because, like I said, from the ages of 16 to 19, I went through this transition where I was like, whoa, my culture, like, and then you come here and you're like, everyone's white, and this suddenly feels weird because I've got back in touch with a side of myself that I sort of forgot about all the way through school. So it feels like a kind of a new affront of whiteness. And I think, like, all the women of colour I know, it's kind of difficult when you come into a space that's so different to you and to how you want to exist, I guess, in that space. And I think it's in the subtle things. So it's in the fact that, like, when you walk down the street, you might not see a single brown or, like, non-white face. And that can be quite strange, especially when, you're trying to escape from an all-white college and then you're like, whoa, where do I go? Like, what do I do? And I think... I think Oxford's the kind of place that you just have to get used to. And I also think that it's hard because when you use the phrase women of colour, obviously that in and of itself is such a paradox. You don't know women of colour has the same experience as any other women of colour. And I think even by using it as a kind of homogenizing term, you forget that even within each woman of colour there is a kind of plethora of experiences that make them a human as well. So like they all have
but those women of color have a different experience than, let's say, a white woman or a white man.
Completely in a structural way. But I do think that also it's easy to forget or omit the fact that we are all like human. And okay, a lot of my struggles at Oxford might be because I'm a woman of color, but a lot of them might be because I'm scared of spiders, or I don't like talking in front of large groups of people, for example. I do, but like, for example, it could be that, and that's not necessarily related to the fact that I am a woman of color. It might be, but it might not be. And I think the minute we start only talking about experiences as a woman of colour, you forget that there are all those other experiences that just come with being a person, which I'm quite cautious about because, you know, putting people together as people of colour is quite a white thing to do because you're kind of looking at everyone who doesn't look like you and saying, okay, they're a homogenous group and I'm a different group.
Right.
Whereas even within the like people of colour group, you know, you get brown people, you get black people, like you get people from everywhere.
But I mean, isn't that the work that you do? I mean, you do the women of color chit chats at Wadham College. That's how I found out about you.
Yeah.
And specifically in the description, I remember it's like if you're a woman of color, woman and woman of color. Or no, you said woman and of color, right?
Self-identifying women and non-binary people. Please come, guys.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, but you're already alienating and putting yourself as the other, right?
I think a lot of that comes from the fact that it's kind of like a reverse of power, I think. So when you are homogenized as a group of women of color, an easy thing to do is to be like, no, fuck that, like I want to be my own person, like I'm Indian, I'm not, my experience is so different from a black woman, like I'm not gonna allow myself to be grouped like this. And then you end up with a lot of disparate kind of threads that all work against each other but are also trying to work against the bigger kind of structural issue. And I think the purpose of having a women of colour collective is that it's defeating that through its own means, if that makes sense. You're like collecting as a group, as a very group that white people are homogenizing you as, but using that collective kind of discrimination to talk about your experiences and how they might be different from someone else's experience. But at the end of the day, because you're seen as that group, you might as well use that collectivization to, I guess, form solidarity or to fight back, if that makes sense. So
obviously you're leading this. It makes me think that when you talk about discrimination, have you faced that?
That's a complicated question. I think when I run the Women of Colour Chat and Chill, in no way do I see myself as the leader. I think I just see myself as bringing people together.
Sure, yeah.
And I think the reason I'm able to do that is because I do have a lot of privilege. Like, my parents are doctors. I went to a fee-paying school in West London. Like, I was able to take a gap year because I could afford that and then come to Oxford. And a lot of that kind of links in with common ground in the way that, it's not necessarily run by all the people it's meant to help. Same with the Women of Colour Chat and Chill. I run it when, maybe a woman of colour who's from a working class background or an international woman of colour should be running it because it should be catering to those who face the most discrimination. But I also feel massively that it shouldn't turn into an identity politics thing in that way. It should be that because I have so much middle class privilege, I'm able to carry that emotional... Sorry?
Upper middle class?
Sorry, upper middle class privilege. I'm much more able to carry that emotional burden, I think, and it's much more my responsibility to carry that burden than it is for someone who actively faces the kind of wave of discrimination on a daily basis. I think if I am able, because of my privilege, to organise and to bring people together through that, then I definitely have the responsibility to do that. But it is in no way kind of me saying, oh, I have all these issues, everyone come and listen to me talk. That's not how I see my role. And I think it's
I don't envision that as that being
but I think it's very easy for us to do that. I think it's very easy to forget that there are class divides and structural divides between even women of colour, and that, especially within Oxford, because it's quite a white upper middle class place, I can much more easily fit into that framework than my women of colour friends who are from less upper middle class backgrounds. And that's something that I have to be very conscious of. Otherwise, I kind of group myself with them, which is unfair on them because I don't have the same disadvantages as they do. Yeah.
So, still, being an Indian, and you've had an experience in Chennai where you worked, but also here, I'm talking about the personal discrimination that you faced, if any at all.
Yeah.
Have you?
Let me think. I think when you're...
If you have to think, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's definitely I've never, since coming to Oxford, faced active discrimination from anyone being
Is that because you're able to blend in so well?
I think partly because I'm able to blend in so well, and partly because at Wadham, it's not the kind of place, luckily, where you get a lot of the people who are very ignorant. I think.
Can you give a little background of Wadham to viewers that don't know?
I obviously have my reservations about Wadham. I think part of it's quite performative, but the essence of and the core of it is a group of people who are open-minded and progressive and aware and tolerant, and that's the kind of community it seeks to create. And I think overall it does actually create that community quite well. It's a special college, and it's a special place, and I think because of that, we face less of the kind of culture that other Oxford colleges might perpetuate of sort of ignorance and all the rest, elitism and all the rest of it. But I would say that a lot of my friends have faced discrimination in Oxford, from tutors or from like just white people. And I think...
In what way?
I don't really want to speak for them, but I think, like I was going to say, a lot of it's quite subtle. And I think we all face a lot of the subtlety of it, especially when you're brown, because I think when you look at the types of like tropes that you face being brown, a lot of it is people assuming that, you know, you work really hard and you don't go out and you're kind of shy and you're kind of awkward and you're quite submissive and passive as a woman. And those are the tropes that we face that I think are quite different to the tropes that other women of colour might face. Right. So a lot of it will be like tutors talking over you, or white people talking over you, or people assuming that if they don't see you for a while it's because you're like working really hard in your room, or people assuming that you don't want to go out, or that you don't smoke, or that you don't, you know, drink, without actually asking or without knowing, because it's just a trope that you fall into. And I think a lot of that feeds into a social dynamic more than it does into anything else. It's this kind of separation where, because you're Indian, you're automatically seen as a shy, kind of slightly lame, nerdy person, and you have to work against that to prove to people that you're actually normal and that you can actually be like them. And I think that's something that is a subtle form of discrimination that's very, very hard to work against, because it isn't something active. You can't shout at someone for it. You can't get angry. But I think I face quite a lot of that, and I know that a lot of my Indian friends have faced that as well. And I think that's obviously quite difficult.
You know, one thing that I've, I guess, faced... So I come from a very privileged background.
Yeah.
I've had it the best of the best growing up, even though I went to a school in Arab, Alabama, where I legitimately made up the diversity. Everyone else was white Caucasian. Yeah. But even there, and then I went to New York and stuff of that nature, I've never had it where I felt so... I don't know, I felt so brown before coming here. Like, especially, like, for example, like, walking out in the streets, right, at post-dark, 9, 10 p.m. I know how many turns I get back of, like, women or men walking in front of me, and they fear that I'm, like, coming back on them. And it's so awkward because I'm listening to my, like, headphones. I'm not, like, paying attention to the world, but then they stop. And I literally, like, when I first moved here, I couldn't tell why people were just stopping and letting me go by. And then I finally caught on. But it's happened 10 to 12 times where people will literally stop on the side of the sideway because I'm following them and using quotations, but I'm just going my way. And I don't realize, I've never realized that I'm a, you know, tall brown man that might be perceived as someone scary. And I've never really, and I guess that's my privilege talking, but I've never had that until I came to Oxford.
And I think that's obviously really shit, and also I think quite classic, and an experience which a lot of people will relate to. And it is crap, and it is...
I never thought I had the ability to scare so many white elderly women.
I know, it's insane, and it's also...
I kind of feel powerful with that.
Maybe keep that on the down. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I've also, like you, despite going to a basically all-white school, I've never been more conscious of my race than coming to Oxford. And I don't know what it is about this space that makes you so conscious of it. I don't know whether it's because it's another way subconsciously to feel different and feel special and like mark yourself out from everyone else who is, you know, so overachieving, or whether it's kind of a deeper, like, I guess, air or environment of like discrimination or elitism where you just can't feel in place because you're just not part of that, and you're not, you never structurally will be. And I think things like that, like people turning or stopping and letting you go past, are just very obvious signs of a potent like air of malcontent and an air of kind of just negative, I guess, vibes towards people of colour. And I think that's very pervasive everywhere.
And it might even be, it might not, I mean, I feel like it might not be on purpose, but I guess that's just what they, like, you know, like, I don't want to blame it them. It's just, that's the bias that they've grown up with, and that's the mindset that they
I think that's so true. That's my main issue with Oxford, is that I don't think many people are consciously racist. I really fundamentally don't. I think so much of it, and why it's so difficult, is because people are so subconsciously racist. And I think the issue with that is that, you know, at the end of the day, we're all socialized to be sexist and racist. And the minute you start telling yourself, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, it's the kind of second it percolates down into your subconscious. And it's like, once it goes there, it's very hard to confront and be like, okay, I have these views that I've been brought up with, or society's told me are right, I need to confront them and like decolonize myself from them. And until, I guess, white people realize that and accept that and start to counter that, you don't really get anywhere, which is why I think the subconscious bias thing is so dangerous, because it is so subconscious and it's so invisible to them, and that I think is the main issue in Oxford.
So I want to move out of Oxford a little bit. Let's talk about more of like your relationship as a diaspora member and your relationship with India. How is that? Like, what do you know, like, and I know, again, I'm asking these broad questions because it depends on you, right? It's a lot on you. So let me say, like, what does it mean to you to be a member of the Indian diaspora? Like growing up, like you said, you really wanted to be part of that culture from 16 to 19. What were you doing that was out of like your comfort zone to make it seem like you were Indian? You were embracing your culture and class, and it's not just about you know, like wearing saris to prom or balls, etc. But what made you feel more Indian?
I think it wasn't something that I actively started doing. It was more embracing things that like my family would do. So for instance, when like I come home after school every day, like from when I was 4, my family would be playing Carnatic music on the like speaker system, or my parents would be cooking Indian food. And whenever I brought friends home, that always really embarrassed me, and I was always like, oh, we'll just go away and come back, or like, haha, isn't this noise so funny, lol. And I hated myself for doing that, but I think when I got to 16, I kind of told myself that isn't how I'm going to treat my culture anymore. I'm going to be proud of it, and I'm going to show that I'm proud of it. And it was a really, really difficult process of like walking in the door with like, for example, my white boyfriend, and not trying to make fun of the way my house smelled, or the kind of food my parents were cooking, or how loudly people were talking, or what music was playing. And that was something I actively started to do when I was 16, is to stop apologizing, I guess, for my culture. And I think like, what else did I do?
Did you ever stop embracing it too? Like, I know you stopped apologizing for it, but
yeah.
I went through a phase where I stopped eating Indian food because I didn't want to smell like quote curry.
Oh my God, 100%. Like pasta was like my dish of choice. It's still, I think, deep down.
Pasta's good though.
Pasta's fucking incredible. But also, it's just there's something about like Indian food that makes you feel different, and like eating with your hands is something I'd never do in front of my friends ever, because it would just be embarrassing. I remember going to my friend's house and they'd ordered an Indian takeaway, and I ate with my hands for the first time in front of white friends, and they all stared at me and laughed at me, and I just kept going. And that was quite a pivotal moment, because that was such an embrace, I think, of
okay, what did you eat with your hands? Like rice and...
It was paratha.
Oh, paratha. What, you're going to eat paratha with a fork and knife?
They cut it up, man. Like,
that is so white.
Isn't that bizarre? I know.
Wait, with a paratha? Like,
No,
I was imagining I was about to be like, okay, Indians don't eat, like, with, like, their hands with rice and stuff.
They
okay,
do.
I mean, yeah, but I mean...
In the South, they still do.
But, yeah, but I mean... Primarily, they do use spoons. With those things exist in India.
I mean, obviously spoons exist in India, but all my family members and all my family friends still eat rice with their hands.
I think so. Do you still eat it on the bay leaf as well?
Occasionally, in special occasions, yeah.
Yeah, so I've been to weddings. We've done that because that's like the traditional cultural. But like on a very daily, like, so if you go to a restaurant and you ask for rice and curry, or if
to be fair, restaurants different, yeah.
Yeah, or even homes. Like, I mean, the spoon is. But I was thinking that I wasn't imagining the paratha and la roti. Wait, no. Paratha and roti with a fork?
Yeah, it's a bit weird. They like cut it up and like kind of like a weird pizza. I don't really get it.
Wait, they eat their pizzas with forks and knives?
A lot of people. To be fair, I sometimes eat pizza with a fork and knife just because it cools down quicker. In a weird way.
I'm giving you a judgmental look.
Okay, yeah, please. I'm really sorry. I'll never do it again.
Please don't.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where they just don't want to get their hands dirty. Which I also like. I think rationally, or like maybe internalized racism, I just get, and that's why it's so hard to like take the plunge and be like, I'm gonna use my hands, because then your hand gets dirty and everyone looks at you in a kind of gross way.
Yeah.
But you just like, again, you just have to, I think, embrace that as a part of your culture, and like in a way see it as, I'm not having to use some weird metal like sticks to eat my food. I can just use my hands, and it's just kind of stupid that you can't. So you sort of have to see it like that. But it is a difficult thing to do, I think.
Mm-hmm. So were you ever into like, so one of the main ways that, especially in London and New York, the main way that diaspora connects back is the movies, the music.
Yeah.
A lot of like that culture, right? The pop culture in a way. Yeah. Did you try to do that, or were you always out of that? And
it's kind of weird, because I know a lot of diaspora Indians have a quite a wide network of other diaspora Indians. They like hang out with, like family, friends, all the rest of it. And my parents never did that. They kind of moved away from India to get away from what they saw as quite a suffocating, judgmental, weird nexus, and they came here to kind of do things on their own. My dad was a Dalit, and my mom was a Brahmin, so the whole caste thing.
Whoa!
Well. Yeah. So
high five to your mom and dad.
I know, they made it. Holy they came here. Shit. I know, they came here and they were like, we just don't want anything to do with that kind of side of India. So I grew up without any real Indian influences. Like my parents' friends are all like kind of quite intelligent academics or like psychiatrists or doctors, and a lot of them are white, some of them are black, some of them are brown, but in no way was that like an Indian influence on me. So I really missed out on that actually, and I feel sad sometimes because I talk to my Indian friends here or my cousins who have all of these Indian cultural influences, like Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, or like all these songs that they know, or these like wedding dances that they know, and I am not as in touch with that. I think partly because my parents, whilst they might have introduced me to it, never forced me or never pushed me to be Indian. Like I was very much allowed to exist as a kind of fake white.
Do you think that's forced in your other friends?
I don't think it's forced, but I think it's much more a part of like how they grow up. Whereas it was never, I think my parents were very careful to never push me in either direction, which I really value and appreciate, but it does mean that I have less of a strong Indian cultural influence than a lot of my friends.
Wait, can we go back to your mom and dad?
Yeah, sure.
So what's their story? I want to know.
They were both at med school together, which is really cute. But so they just met at med school and then got together, and it was quite...
Where in med school? Like where in Chennai?
GMC, so Grant Medical College in Mumbai.
In Mumbai, okay.
And yeah, I think it was quite... I don't know a lot of the details, I think probably deliberately, but it was quite a...
And I'm assuming they had a... Yeah,
they had quite a hard time.
What about your grandparents had?
Yeah, I don't think my grandparents were... My grandparents are still on... Hopefully you never hear this, party. But my grandparents are still, I don't think, a huge fan of my dad.
Sending this to your party.
Yeah, I can't wait. But yeah, and so I think that's always like played into family dynamics a bit. And because my grandparents are Brahmin, my cousin had a thread ceremony. And I didn't go, my parents didn't go to the thread ceremony, and there was like this big like, whoa, why are you like trying to take us away from our culture kind of thing. But so there's been a lot of, I think, tension because of that.
Is your mother Tambra?
Yeah.
Ooh, that makes it even...
I know. I'm such a weird like mix. But
you're a true mudblood.
I'm truly
Hermione Granger, right?
But it's been, I think because of that, when they came here, they were very much like trying to like separate themselves from what they saw as quite a like negative, toxic
aspects.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So in a way, you were isolated from that because of, I guess, the struggle that your parents came out of.
Yeah, very true. And in a way, I'm also kind of glad I was, because I think I've grown up with a lot. Like I have, I think, a huge amount of self-confidence for a brown woman. I'm very... Like, I've never gone into anything thinking that I don't deserve it or I can't get it. And I think a lot of people can see that as arrogance, but I just perceive it as the way I was brought up was very much like, if you want something, you can go and get it. Like, you're perfectly capable.
And you don't think that's across the board for other members or other Indian women of color?
I don't think it is, but obviously I can't speak for every Indian woman, but a lot of the brown women of color I've met have these invisible obstacles in their head where they feel like they're not good enough and they feel like they have to like apologize or...
And that's an upbringing thing.
I think it's not like a deliberate upbringing thing. I'd never ever say that. I don't think any parent wants their daughter to grow up feeling like they can't do anything, but I think it's a part of an Indian cultural tradition of seeing women as lesser than men, which I think is still very obviously so pervasive in India. And I never had access to any of that, which I'm quite grateful for.
That's interesting. See, again, I guess that's my privilege speaking as a Indian brown male. I like what you say. It's like I've never had that feeling of I can't do anything. Like I never had that support. And
I think as a man though, it's also quite different, right? So like if you're a brown man
100%.
in an Indian family, they'll be like, "Yes, my son, please go do it."
I like your Indian accent.
Thank you so much.
Is that the Tambram accent?
100%.
Is that
Zoe? But yeah, so I was talking to my friend at my college who, went to quite an Indian school, like has a lot of like Indian women of color friends, and she was saying that she doesn't know many Indian women who are very self-confident and who feel like they can just get anything they want. So I do feel like from that, it feels like my experience has been quite different. But then again, like she's obviously not speaking for the entire diaspora, so I don't really know. But I do feel like
it's an individual struggle.
It's an individual struggle, and I think it's so important for women of colour to be raised to be empowered, and I think all of society is working against us to tell us that we can't be empowered.
Right. It's so weird because there's so many groups. What you say, it's like I can't speak for one specific society or the diaspora, because you see these trends in the diaspora, but you also don't see them in the diaspora. In the same instance, you see them in, let's say, rural India. Let's say in a village in Haryana, right? You will have those dynamics where the woman is really not just sheltered, but very, in a way, closeted, right, and restricted. But at the same time, going to NYU, right? seeing these women come from, you know, these metropolitan cities or even rural cities and being able to chase those dreams was also very, I guess, like, goes against the standards that we project and see. So one of the biggest things I'm like picking up is you can't really say, okay, like, this section of society or this group of people all go through that cycle. It's a very individual group.
It's really difficult,
And it's right, like, it's correct that a lot of people, especially part of the diaspora, which I've seen is fairly more conservative now than urban India.
Yeah, that's fair.
You see a lot of that happening in the diaspora.
I think it's really, really tricky because, again, like, this whole thing of being like, in my core I'm an Indian is such a difficult dynamic for a diaspora person, because at the end of the day, you're not Indian in the same way that a person growing up in India is Indian.
Well, what does it mean to be an Indian, right?
Exactly, but I think it's very easy to co-opt into a culture that isn't yours. And I think I think I probably spent a bit of time very much being like, I'm Indian, but like I was still completely different to a lot of the Indian women I knew, and I think there was I don't know what exactly I'm trying to say, but I felt like there was something slightly problematic about being a diaspora woman of colour and claiming to be Indian and claiming to speak for a lot of Indians in a way that I just didn't think I had the authority to now. For instance, stuff like cultural appropriation, which I'm so against. Like, I remember talking to my parents about it, and there was this thing a while ago in Australia where they used, like, Ganesha in an advert. Do you remember? Yeah, and, like, there was a huge uproar about it, and everyone was like, how dare you, like, co-opt our gods to make an advert about meat? And I was so angry. I was like, have you seen this? Like, how dare fucking Australians, who do they think they are? And my parents were like, yeah, it's bad, but they made this really interesting point about how, because the way India is going is so much more towards the right now, I think they saw that backlash towards that kind of Western co-option of Ganesha is very much feeding into this narrative of like, oh, we hate the Westerners, we need to stay true to our conservative Indian, like, Hindu selves, like, big up the Hindus, we hate white people. And it's very hard when, as a diaspora, like, person, you perpetuate that as well, because so much of what you're saying feeds very easily into that narrative. And that made me think quite hard about how much privilege I have as a diaspora girl, and how I need to use that, and how angry I get over certain things versus other things. If that makes sense?
No, that makes complete sense. I mean, in the past at least 3-4 years, you see, and it's been going on for a very long time, but especially in the past 3-4 years, you've seen an attempt to take over what it means to be Hindu and what it means to be Indian. Now that kind of brought in, like, what about religion? Are you, like, what does Hinduism mean? Or are you not? Yeah, to you and to your family as well.
We've never done anything Hindu. I don't think. We do Diwali, I think, because it's fun.
But that's cultural, come on.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so cultural. But, like, we've never been... It's funny because my cousins, I think, do a lot more Hindu stuff than we do.
Coming from a Tam Brown family.
Yeah, exactly. We've never, ever been Hindu. Like, I've never identified as Hindu. I did Sanskrit because I went to a school in London called St. James where they taught Sanskrit. So I've done Sanskrit from when I was 4 to when I was 18.
Really?
Yeah.
So you can write Sanskrit, and you can listen to shlokas.
Yeah. So a lot of my influence as a child is like the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, like the Bhagavad Gita.
So this is what it means for you to be an Indian, right? When you were saying that, like 16 to 19, so you said you didn't watch the Bollywood movies, which is like, you know, the status quo.
Yeah.
It's the Maggie, the, you know, like these very instances, the Limca, thumbs up, whatever, or not even that. But yours is a very, I guess... It's a very different, you know, like, so you didn't talk about this, so...
Yeah, it's just a weird thing, though, because I learnt it in a very white atmosphere. Like, St. James was an English school. I never felt like it was directly connected to my Indian heritage. And then when I left St. James, went to a different secondary school, I kept up Sanskrit for my GCSE and my A-level. And, you know, you get to the stage with a language where you can read it and not have to translate it in your head. And when I started to do that with, like, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, it, like... really hit me that there was something so special about Sanskrit and something that made me feel special because I was connected to it.
So you've read... I'm sorry, I'm still, like, shocked right now. So you've read Mahabharata and the Ramayana in Sanskrit.
Not the whole Mahabharata.
But even excerpts.
Yeah.
Because someone who is super interested... I'm from Kurukshetra, which is basically where Jyotish or Mahabharata basically took place, and where the Gita was delivered.
Crazy, yeah.
So to me, like, I've read English translations, I've read Hindi translations, and tried to get through all of it, but then reading it in Sanskrit, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a different level, and it also makes you feel really empowered, because a lot of the time when you're trying to talk about how great the Indian history is, you can't put your finger on why. You're just like, yeah, we were great and you colonized us. But having, like, a knowledge of Sanskrit and a knowledge of the grammar behind Sanskrit, which is so so crazy complex, really gives you something, and it gives you something to hold on to. And the way that, you know, the language is crafted and the way it's built up on these kind of foundations of intense grammatical complexity is really special, I think, to the, I don't know, I feel like maybe to the Indian psyche. I kind of think about it a lot, and I'm sort of like, Indians are so, like, there is a culture within India being good at maths and science and this mathematical rigor, and I think a lot of that stems, in my opinion, from the fact that Sanskrit is such a mathematical language. The way you have to think about it is logic and maths and science, and that's kind of a psychological thing, whereas, you know, English is such a amalgamation of different languages and different grammar and different logics that they all kind of play against each other. And I see a lot of the English values being in the humanities and in history and in English and literature and stuff. So yeah, I don't know, that's probably completely false in many ways, but it strikes me as an interesting pattern, maybe.
So I'm still shocked. I
feel like I got a C in my A-levels. It's
wow. I think, so one thing that I'm just thinking about is I've partaken in a lot of religious rituals of Hinduism, and they're all Sanskrit shlokas, right? Yeah. And being able to actually understand that and what's being, I think that just adds another value to it, another dimension to it, regardless if you're religious or not religious, right? That's not what it is. It's that you're understanding, because these rituals are taken, whether it's in Kanyakumari or Kashmir, right?
Yeah.
And they partake in that, and they're all done in Sanskrit, not in Hindi. So that's crazy.
It's crazy also because, like, obviously the language is so beautiful, and like everything about it is so, like, amazing. You're like, whoa. But
and the Mahabharata is all poetic, right?
It's really crazy. The Bhagavad Gita is, like, so stunning. Yeah. But a lot of it's also, like, ridiculously casteist, which, like, I never pick up on, obviously, when you're younger, but, like, as you grow up and you're kind of within, like, I think the GCSE or the A-level Sanskrit curriculum, there's a lot of, like, learning about the culture, and there's, like, they, like, give you all the different subsects of societies. They put the Brahmin, and then they put the, like, Kshatriya, and then the farmer, I can't remember what one that, and then the like, merchant, and then the Shudras at the bottom, and they give you the description of who that person is. And when you see, like, Shudra, servant / slave, it's just a bit like, whoa, this is really not great. Like,
but a lot of that is, like, also the British conceptualization, right?
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as it was. I mean, also those tiers did exist, but obviously the British came in with their influence and tried to simplify it for them to understand.
But it was very much part of the Sanskrit culture to have these separations, because a lot of the way it's talked about in the Bhagavad Gita is to do with, like, the Brahmin will achieve, you know,
this, that,
Ananda bliss or something like that, and the Shudra has to keep serving in order to achieve this. So there's a lot of that's ingrained within the way Krishna talks to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's just interesting that those kind of things run so deep within India, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. So I didn't realize that this is where this conversation would take, but
neither actually.
But no, it's interesting to hear what it means to be a diaspora for you.
Yeah, I think, again, like we were just saying, it's so individual. So, like, Sanskrit is such a weird thing to do as a diaspora, but so many diaspora that I know have their connection to India and Bollywood. And, like,
the classification, right? So, like, I could meet so many of the diaspora members that are really connected to the culture, tradition, India, right? Whatever that means to be. But nowhere would they be able to connect in the terms of, like, Mahabharata, Ramayana, reading Sanskrit, etc. Or any other of, like, the languages that originated from that region. Anyways, I think I've taken enough of your time. I would first of all, I'm going to send this to your buddy.
Can't wait. Hi, buddy.
That's the first thing I'm going to do.
No
but
worries.
Thank you so much for coming.
No, thanks for having me. It's been so much fun.
It was a pleasure talking to you, and you've given a new definition of what it means to be an Indian diaspora.
Cool.